Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Today our topic is the third conditional. Let's first review the clause. A clause is a group of related words which has its own subject and a verb. There are two types of clauses, independent clause and a dependent clause. An independent clause expresses a complete thought and can stand alone as a coherent sentence, whereas a subordinate or dependent clause does not express a complete thought and therefore is not a sentence. A subordinate clause standing alone is a common error known as a sentence fragment. Conditional sentences have two parts. They have two clauses that give a condition in the dependent clause and a result clause in the independent clause. The third conditional. The third conditional talks about the past. We talk about a condition in the past that did not happen. That is why there is no possibility for this condition. The third conditional is also like a dream, but with no possibility of the dream coming true. Let's look at the structure of the third conditional. We have the if clause, which is called the conditional clause, and in this clause we use the past perfect tense. In the result clause we use would have plus past participle, that is the third form of the verb, or perfect continuous. It means, it says that if this thing had happened, that thing would have happened. But this thing did not happen, and therefore that thing also could not happen. Let's look at an example. If I had gotten up on time, I would have offered the Fajr Salah in time. But the reality is that I could not, and I did not wake up on time, and therefore I could not offer the Fajr Salah in time. The order of clauses, as in all conditional sentences, the order of the clauses is not fixed. When you change the order of the clauses, you may have to rearrange the pronouns and adjust punctuation. But in both cases, the meaning is identical. Let's look at some examples to understand better. If it had rained, and you can see that this is the conditional clause with its own subject and own verb, and it begins with if. Then we have this dependent clause in the beginning of the sentence. We put a comma after it. If it had rained, you would have gotten wet. You would have gotten wet if it had rained. Now we have the if clause or the dependent clause at the end, and we have the independent clause at the beginning of the sentence, and there is no comma between them. You would have calculated it correctly if you had paid more attention during class. If you had paid more attention during class, comma, you would have calculated it correctly. I would have believed you if you hadn't lied to me before. If you hadn't lied to me before, comma, I would have believed you. Notice that we are thinking about an impossible past condition. You did not wake up on time, so the condition was not true, and that particular condition can never be true because it is finished. We use the past perfect tense to talk about the impossible past condition, and we use would have plus the past participle to talk about the impossible past result. The important thing about the third conditional is that both the condition and result are impossible now. The third conditional sentences are truly hypothetical and unreal because it is now too late for the condition or its result to exist. There is always some implication of regret with type 3 conditional sentences. The reality is the opposite of or contrary to what the sentence expresses. In type 3 conditional sentences, the time is the past and the situation is hypothetical. So let's go over some more examples. We know that like all conditional sentences, there is an if clause and there is a result clause. In the third conditional, we have the past perfect in the if clause, and we have would have plus past participle or the past perfect continuous tense in the result clause. Let's look at some examples. If I had seen mother, I would have told her. If Tamim had been free yesterday, I would have invited him. If they had not passed their exams, their teacher would have been sad. If it had rained yesterday, would you have stayed at home? If it had rained yesterday, what would you have done? Some more examples. I would have told father if I had seen him. Now, in this case, we have the result clause first and the if conditional afterwards. I would have invited Ahmed if he had been free yesterday. Their teacher would have been sad if they had not passed their exam. Would you have stayed at home if it had rained yesterday? What would you have done if it had rained yesterday? And you can see that in these examples, we do not have a comma after the first clause. In type 3 conditional sentences, you can also use modals like should have, could have, might have instead of would have in the main clause to express the degree of certainty, permission, or a recommendation about the outcome. For example, if you had studied harder, you might have secured more than 90%, so that is a possibility. If you had warned me, I could have understood the sensitivity of the information. You could have been on time if you had caught the bus. If he had called you, you could have gone. If you had bought my school supplies for me, I might have been able to go to the park. Now check your understanding. The third conditional is used when the condition and the result are no longer possible, still possible, always true. No longer possible. If we dash free, we would have gone with you. Which is correct? Were, are, had been. Were. If we were free, we would have gone with you. If you'd studied harder, you dash failed, which creates a third conditional sentence that makes sense. Would, would have, wouldn't have. Wouldn't have. If you had studied harder, you wouldn't have failed. These are the references. Jazakallah. That's all for today. Allah Hafiz.